All right. So last meetup of 2018. So thank you all for coming. Really, really excited. I mean, if you just look around, this is an amazing turnout. Thank you so much all for coming. And actually, if you want to, but it actually hasn't always been like this type of turnout. I'll move over to the side. So this is actually a chart that Meetup gives you to show the progression of your meetup over time. And I like to tell this story because when we first started this meetup about 3-4 years ago, the first meetup we ever had, we actually had more pizzas than people show up. Insane. And there was also a Warriors game, it was raining, so a lot of things working against us. But I think, the thing that makes it so awesome to see and to keep us doing this is everybody turning out for this. And this is really, really amazing. It's a testament to the growth of this community, the strength of the customer success community, and the passion that everybody has. And so thank you so much. Round of applause for everybody that's here today. So I want to take a couple minutes to reflect back on 2018. So we've had an amazing year for the meetup. Amazing hosts from Looker, Autodesk, Figure 8, WalkMe, Zendesk, Keep Truckin', Pendo, Clearbit, the University of San Francisco, who is starting an MBA program focused on customer success, and finally WeWork. And so this is actually really, really special because WeWork owns Meetup. And so it's a really fun kind of way to end the year and bring it all home. We hit some amazing topics. If you ever, I'm sure you guys all see these emails coming out from me, but if you ever think of, I would love to hear a topic that we talk about for next year, we're already starting to plan for next year, please shoot me a note. Some of these topics actually came from feedback from this audience, and so really looking forward to that. Customer onboarding is a really, really critical one. It's one that we actually tackle every single year because it's so important. So really, really excited to dig into that. One last thing I want to plug is actually, I know we're done with the meetups this year, but if you can't get enough customer success, we're actually hosting a webinar with a company called Catalyst out in New York. So myself, Miranda, and Amelia, maybe you guys can stand up. We're actually going to do, already standing, so we're doing another webinar at the end of the month. So please sign up, webinar.getcatalyst.io. I'll send an email out so that way you can join that. But it's all around how do you kickstart and start a customer success program. One last thing, so we are taking a break for November and December for the holidays. But John, Emily, and I, we're actually going to be continuing to work on the meetup, not only planning next year, but we're actually going to be launching a YouTube channel with all of the recordings of that we have. And so you'll see a camera back there. We're recording this. And so thank you so much for WeWork. And along those lines, this all wouldn't be possible without our amazing hosts. And so I want to turn it over to the WeWork team, Edward and Teresa, who's going to say a little bit about what WeWork does and welcome you guys to the space.
How's it going, everyone? Good. Show of hands real quick. Who's been to a WeWork before? Awesome. And who's currently a WeWork member? Great. Good to hear. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you to everyone who helped set up the event, plan the event. We're really grateful for that. To host the last customer success meetup of the year. For those of you who I haven't met tonight, and I'm sure that's most of you, my name's Edward Gorebyss. I help lead the enterprise account management team here on the West Coast for WeWork. I know a few of you asked me tonight what the enterprise business looks like for WeWork. Want to share a little bit about that as we get started. So for us, it's been a 2-year journey to grow. We have about 1,800 member organizations globally that we work with. Over 300 locations in 25 different countries. But more locally, in Northern California, we're working with 25,000 members in 20 different locations, and we're growing rapidly. So again, I know I've spoken to a few of you. If there is interest in talking about enterprise account management or mid-market account management at WeWork, feel free to find us after. We're always happy to chat. But I figure as we talk about processes and customer onboarding, it's imperative to talk about who really helps with that process. And for us, unlike traditional tech and SaaS companies, which is really focused on heavy upkeep with getting folks off the ground, for us, our product is really physical and it has people within it as well. And those people are kind of the bread and butter of what we do here, and that's our community management team. So I figure who better to bring us up to speed and get us to understand what we do here at WeWork and how we onboard customers, whether it's a consumer customer, a mid-market customer, or an enterprise customer. So with your help, I really want to welcome our community manager for this building, Teresa Lucas.
Welcome! Hi everyone, welcome to Montgomery Station. I'm so excited to have you guys all here. It's basically my second home, so thank you for being here. As Edward said, I'm Teresa, I'm the community manager here. I started with WeWork back in December, and back then it was a little bit different than what you see today. But as a community manager, it's our goal to really coordinate with the operations teams, the sales teams, the hospitality teams, but more importantly, our main focus is to create an incredible member experience. So back in December, when the doors opened here, we opened with 700 members. And as Edward says, we're scaling like crazy. And now, as of today, we have nearly 1,700 members in this space alone. So people ask me pretty frequently, what's your secret sauce? And what I can say is it's our community teams. You know, the minute you become a member at WeWork and you walk through the doors, we want it to be a celebration. We want you to feel so welcome. And so what we do is we throw mimosa parties. We make sure there's swag laid out for you. But more importantly, we invite you to a new member orientation. Now, new member orientations are really important for us because it's our chance to make face-to-face contact with the new members at Montgomery Station. It's where we answer questions, we set expectations, and we also go over, you know, our technology, our software, our platforms. How do you reach us via the app? How does this work for you? In this time period, we are also able to go over what connections are important to you. What industries are you looking to get involved with? What types of people are you looking to meet, both in this WeWork and in WeWorks nearby or globally? This data is really important for us to collect. So as you can imagine, it's important that our software matches our human services, right? And so by collecting that data, we're able to understand, wow, people are really interested in customer success. They're interested in getting to know people on customer onboarding. Maybe we should do a meetup. What do you think? Should we do a meetup? That's how this happens. So we're able to collect that information, store it, and hopefully capitalize on that and have really strong retention within our company. And so with this technology, and as we're scaling it so rapidly, it's important for us to be in the know of what other companies are doing around us and how they're collecting that data. So I'm so excited for tonight to understand what our panelists are going to say and how they're using technology and their software for onboarding their customers. And we hope to learn for them to make sure we're on track. So thank you for being here. I'm going to introduce our moderator, John, if you wouldn't mind taking the mic. All right, guys.
Thanks very much, guys. All right, here we go. So before we get down to business, panelists, let's quick introduction. Actually, you know what? Round of applause for the panelists, because it takes a little bit of guts to get up here. So let's start left to right. Quick introduction and maybe share why customer success is awesome.
Sure. Romeo Leon. I work for a company called Figure 8. I've been in customer success before I was even named customer success. So at that point, it was either account management, pseudo professional services, and so on and so forth. I also worked in SaaS prior to it being SaaS, so I've been around the block for a little bit longer. Yeah, great space. I've been in post-sales for all my life after my first job, and I've just enjoyed it ever since. So very happy to be here.
Angeline Felix. I'm the Director of Global Customer Success for Snowflake. We're a cloud computing company for cloud data warehouse. I've been in customer success for 6 years, leading teams for the past few years. I've also, like Romeo, have been in like account management, sales, transitioned into customer success because I really believe in being a customer first mindset and taking care of our customer base.
Hi. Hey, everybody. My name is Alan. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success at Amplitude. We help companies build better products. I am the youngest one on the panel today, and my career has not been very long. I've been doing CS for maybe 5 years now, and that's my entire time in tech. But I've learned a lot at Amplitude with our growth. I've had the opportunity to build out this team and bring in some awesome people into our company. And I guess the reason why me and CS are a good fit is that my background's in education. I was a teacher before this. I did Teacher America for a couple of years. And I think at its root, that's what CS is, right? You're teaching people how to get value from the purchase they made, right? Some customers of ours will spend, $36K a year to $1 million, $2 million a year, and that's a big bet they're making on you and on your product, and it could be a pretty big game changer for them. So that's why it's important. That's why I do it.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much, guys. So oftentimes when we're getting advice and we're listening to panels, I find one of the most important things is the context behind what people are saying. We've got people in this room right now who are at pretty early stage startups, right to companies that have IPO'd. So what I want to do is I want to ask the panelists a little bit more about the context that you're currently operating in. Tell us a little bit more about your businesses, how big maybe the deal sizes are if you can, how mature the company is. I think that'll give everybody a good baseline for where these perspectives are coming from on onboarding.
Sure. Yeah, so deal sizes at Figure 8 hover at around 100K, right? So we have a interesting two-sided marketplace where on one side of that market are our customers that are running these jobs in order to essentially generate training data for machine learning purposes, right? And on the other side of that platform are what we call contributors that actually do the labeling and annotation of these data sets. So if a customer spends a subscription with us for 100K, they're actually spending much more than that from a contributor perspective because they also have to pay those contributors. So it's a fairly complex two-sided marketplace that adds just another layer of complexity on top of a typical SaaS business, right? So what are the other parts of that question?
I think that's a good enough start. Yeah, that's good. Let's keep going.
So I think I bring two different perspectives. So Snowflake is a growing, fast, hyper-growth startup. I'm 4 weeks into the job. So I'm in the building phase. We have a very large customer base already. So I would say customer success now at Snowflake is like a startup within a startup. So our sales team is more mature. We're about a year in from a customer success standpoint. So we have a pretty large customer base. Deal sizes are pretty high, actually, ACV. I would say 100 to 200K average deal size. And then just so prior perspective, I was at New Relic, which was a public company, about 1,000 employees. I ran a 90-day onboarding team. So I bring both the public and a hypergrowth startup perspective.
Yeah, we're also in the hypergrowth stage, probably a bit behind Snowflake. Right now, Amplitude's around 200 people, a little more than 200. And yeah, we work with customers from startups to the top of the Fortune list, and our average deal size will range anywhere between 36 to in the millions. I think this question is important because as the company has evolved and we've transitioned to focus more upmarket, we've really had to change the way that we approach customer success and onboarding. So looking forward to getting more into that. Right now, we sell primarily into product and growth teams. They buy our software, and it's usually the most expensive line item on their budget. So for us, that's even more pressure to make sure we deliver value because if there's no value, then we'll get cut. And like most people here, we've had that happen before, and that's kind of part of the growing pains.
Cool. All right. So I think right away we start to learn all the deal sizes here are bigger deal sizes. So probably like the context of a lot of the answers that we're going to get, it's a higher touch model, more
Or like high value, higher touch sort of
higher
quadrant.
value, higher touch. So frame everything in, I think, in that light. So the deal closes, you're getting a new customer. Maybe like share a little bit about that customer journey. Talk about what happens before they land on your team's desk.
Yeah, so we have a fairly sort of standardized new customer journey, right? Starting from, let's say, that initial kickoff with the customer as well as like the internal kickoff with your sales team, right? And then right after that, the CSM is responsible for the onboarding phase, right? Right after that, there's a critical process or a milestone where we expect our customers to, let's say, launch production level volumes in our platform in order to start getting value from the annotations that are being provided by the marketplace. If they're not doing that, guess what? It's a churn, sort of candidate downstream, right? If they are doing that, what we typically see is that they get a lot of good data that they can then use to train their machine learning models, and then they want to run more, right? So that's really sort of the adoption phase of the process, right? When they do that and they get really good sort of results as far as our algorithms are concerned, what we typically see is that they start talking about us to other teams, right? And then they reach out, leading to, let's say, upsell or renewals with upsell opportunities. So that's the typical journey that I like to see. Obviously, expansion and advocacy at sort of the end would be the best outcomes, right, for us. But that's what it looks like.
So from a Snowflake perspective, we're really focused on the beginning parts of the journey, so the handoff, the onboarding, adoption. Our mission is to get our customers to production and consumption of our product very quickly. The renewals and cross-sell, upsell is handled by our sales organization, so they do all the account management components. So from an onboarding perspective, so just to give you more context, I actually report into a services organization. Our product has a lot of services, heavy lifting components, so there's a lot of different architects that come into the picture, technical account managers. So when we do a handoff, we work with the sales team to understand, why they bought. There's a pre-sales organization that puts components in why they did a POC, and then working on building a customer success plan to figure out, are we on track, and this is what you're going to implement in terms of what the customer wants to do in terms of their use cases. So they're really focused on validating that, getting the customer to get trained, educated on our product, know how to log support tickets, log into our community, and then really focus on finding other use cases, doing health checks and consumption as part of that. QBRs are part of that whole process. So.
I'm going to approach the customer journey from a different angle. I think I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and previously it was very focused on Amplitude and our actions. And I think when you think about the customer journey, it's really about the customer and their outcomes. So the story that we tell customers, or the path that we have customers go on to really achieve success, ends with them building a better product, right? They want to improve their product outcomes. For this audience, I'll kind of make it simple. But the three elements needed to do that are 1, data, 2, insights, and 3, action. Without any of those elements, a customer can't improve their product. So that's what the customer sees and hears during our sales process. They get bought into that. And when my team gets a customer from the sales team, we think about, now, how do we execute on that, right? How do we take customers on that journey? And for us, it really falls into 3 phases. So the first phase is what we call activation, right? So activation is really focused on the first 2 buckets, data and insights. Does the customer have the right data in Amplitude? Is it trustworthy? Is it clean? Is it comprehensive? Second is insights. Do they know how to use the product? Are they doing the right analysis? So that's phase one, activation. Phase two is delivery. All right, you can have all the insights in the world, but if you don't do anything with it, then you're not getting any value. We are super focused on making sure that customers will take their insights and turn it into action, right? What are they doing with that? And we are there to help bridge that gap, right? We're teaching frameworks, how the new ways that people are developing product. And that way, right, through this journey, right, we will go through this cycle of activation and delivery constantly. So for us, honestly, onboarding is never really done. It's just the first part of onboarding, right? We activate them, we deliver, and then we understand what are your new requirements, right? What are your new goals, new objectives, right? And then we reactivate with either the right data, more data, fixing data, the new analysis that you need to do, new things you need to learn, to redeliver on that. And then through this cycle, right, of activation and delivery, we get to the final phase, which is expansion, right? Now, we've earned the right to expand or even just to renew the customer. So that's kind of how we see the customer journey at Amplitude, and the onboarding specifically is focused on the activation, right? So getting data and insights, for the customer.
That's really interesting. I totally agree with what you said, Alan. I think when people buy your product, there's this incredible promise of whatever you're going to do, and you talked about asking what that promise is and how do we get there. So talking about that promise a little bit more, how do you capture that information or that what value means to the customer? And then who's involved in making sure that everybody sees that value from both the customer side and then also your company's side?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important at the kickoff that you define and get buy-in on the customer success criteria, right? So if your CSMs aren't asking that question, that's a bad sign, right? And especially getting sign-off from the decision maker or decision maker level at the company that the AE has sold to, right? And if there's no alignment in that process and you're not asking those right questions, you're going to be in trouble downstream because there's nothing to sort of, benchmark against, right? But if you know exactly, hey, like for my company, success criteria could be we want to put our models in production by X date, and we want to increase accuracy of our predictive model from 70% to 90% because that's what it's going to take to actually go in production. So that's meaningful for us because we can actually take action to help the customer get to that particular outcome, right? So you're right, it's really all about the outcomes, right, that the customer is looking for, and you gotta document that and get sign off at the kickoff.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's why we have a customer success template that we used in terms of our handoff with our sales team. So if our sales and pre-sales engineering teams have done a POC, is capturing that information, capturing what they've done in an account plan, and then kind of validating that internally. And then when we talk about the specific use cases, also talking about that in the customer kickoff. And really, again, as validating the success criteria throughout that process, because if we're not all aligned and internally and with the customer, we would need to know how to be successful in those particular use cases. So we use that as a template. With our expanded teams, it becomes even more complex because we have all these professional services personas that are embedded in with our customers. So if they buy a services engagement, we have to include them and what are they working on. So it's important to get all the teams aligned and making sure that the customer gets what they were promised. So.
A question for you all. Who here has gone through the command of the message training or command of the sale training with force management?
Me.
couple of us? Oh, one in the audience? Awesome, great. If you have a few $100,000 to spare, I would definitely go through that
Per
training.
person?
No, I guess it's for the whole group. I would definitely recommend going through that because that has really changed the way that we as a go-to-market function think about the customer journey and all the parts of that. And what we really spent a lot of time focused on is understanding why the customer is buying or even engaging with us in the first place. And our sales team has been super trained on going through this process, so that when a customer signs a contract, when we have that internal kickoff, that is the first thing my team will ask for. Why did the customer buy? And if there's ever any kind of doubt into why, we will hop on that, right? Because the only criteria I have for a successful kickoff, right, is understanding why the customer bought. If you can get that from the meeting and reconfirm that with the economic buyer, then you're good to go, right? Things will fall into place from that. But if you don't have that from the economic buyer, and it has to be from the economic buyer, no one else, then you're asking for trouble later on. So that's how we approach that, and it's really about having that conversation with the customer. And I would say the area that we can improve, and maybe you can give me some tips here, is sharing that internally. I think my team has a really good understanding of why the customer bought and what they're trying to do. But for our own product team, our marketing team, I think we do a much better job of sharing that with them, especially as the criteria change. Right? When you have an EBR 6 months down the road and the measure for success or the objectives change, we need to understand that and then share that internally. And I think right now that's an area that we can definitely do better.
Yeah, I think along those lines, it's really important that you have some sort of readiness checklist, right? So we all know that sometimes when sales sell something, you expect someone to actually be running the product on behalf of the customer, right? That doesn't always happen. I got an email recently escalated from one of my CSMs, and the customer asked the CSM, "What is the platform?" Like that was literally. So we're like, "Oh God," right? And right. So then internal escalation, right, to sales and making sure that we actually set the expectations around. There's someone that needs to be running this from the customer's behalf, right? And if they don't even understand there's a platform that they actually need to use, that's a recipe for disaster. But having these sort of processes and these checklists and sort of exposing that internally, I think is a really good idea at some point, in your maturity, right? Because the reality is, if you kind of go back to SaaS fundamentals, right? I'm sure you guys have heard this, but there's a fairly important ratio that we need to optimize around, right? Which is your CAC to LTV, right? CAC is your efficiency in actually closing deals, right? And LTV is a function of essentially churn, right? So if we are just bringing in customers that are not going to renew at some point, well, you're not being efficient in the sales process, right? So your CAC actually goes up, right? But if you're able to identify customers that are actually a really good fit, right? So this starts with marketing, right? And making sure they understand what those, what the checklist needs to be in order for them to actually, replicate. Here are the good customers. Go find that marketing team, right? Go do campaigns around that, and then you have a virtuous cycle, right? Does that make sense?
That makes 100% sense. Yeah, I completely agree. You gotta watch the top of the funnel,
Gotta watch
even
the top
before
of the
they
funnel.
close.
Sure.
So, really great insights there. Who's owning all of this? Do you have a dedicated team just for onboarding? Are your customer success managers doing it? Is it like a services team that's coming in and they're actually paying for onboarding?
Yeah.
Walk me through, what does that look like?
So for Figure 8, we recently made a change. Prior to, I would say, Q3-ish, the CSMs were managing both the onboarding process as well as delivering the trainings, right? We've been investing in a professional services team starting this fiscal year. I'd actually moved trainings to be delivered by the PS team to free up time for the CSMs, right? So at some point in your sort of life cycle or your maturity cycle, and as you move up market, right? In this case, we're a high touch, sort of high value, high complexity type of company, right? It's somewhat inevitable to build PS, right? Because to address that level of complexity, right? And you need to move away from the model where the CSM does everything and wears all the hats, right? And start kind of breaking up those responsibilities to people who can actually specialize in certain things, right? So in this case, PS delivering trainings, and again, training is just one aspect of the onboarding process. It's not the only activity in the onboarding process. CSMs are able to manage that process, drive time to value, right? Where PS can literally do this in a repeatable fashion. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so talking about PS, so we do have offerings for onboarding customers, could be like a training, a best practice. So those are paid engagements. So those could be introduced with a product solution with a services package, as an example. In terms of onboarding with CS, as a high-touch model, we do the onboardings in terms of making sure, again, the customer gets into our community so they know how to log support tickets. We have a Snowflake University, so we want to make sure customers attend our university so they get training, as an example. So those are part of the components that our CSMs will be doing throughout the onboarding process, as an example, and then managing the customer success plan throughout that process in addition. So.
I thought your point was great. For each of you, I'll talk about how Amplitude does things, but it's really important to understand that we've evolved a lot over the last few years, and your company might be ahead of us, might be behind us, and that's okay. When we first started the team, it was a one does all. CSM does everything, and that's what the company needed, and we did it. As we've matured, we start to specialize a little bit more. We've broken out the technical aspect into a different role, and they are responsible for that. At the end of the day, though, the thing that has been consistent, no matter how big the company has been, is that the CSM is accountable for the onboarding. All right? It's their ass on the line if things don't go well, and it's their job to make sure that resources are allocated appropriately, whether it's from our solutions team or from our product team, our engineering team, right? Like, they're the ones that need to make that happen, and they understand that. Who's doing the actual work, that will change over time, right? My solutions team, right, they will do the actual technical implementation, help customers with that. And soon, now that we finally have hired a VP of services to be my counterpart, the initial trainings will be kind of looped under her. But until then, it's the CSM. And the CSM has to figure out how to deploy the resources of the company to the customer to make them successful, right? They're the ones accountable for that.
Gotcha. I love all those answers.
Yeah. And
Really
also, like, just, you also need to put yourself in the CSM shoes when trainings are no longer something that they actually deliver. There's a change management process to make sure that that's actually effective, right? Otherwise, it seems like you're taking things away, right, from the CSM, or what you're actually trying to do is free them up so they can be much more strategic, right?
So it's really important. Onboarding is really important, and what measures matters. So how do you measure the success of your onboarding? Because I'd be willing to bet, or I know for a fact that it's a good leading indicator if you're going to renew or grow that customer. So how do you measure the onboarding phase?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned sort of like the risk scorecard right in the beginning, and sort of making sure that that's a process that you follow. Other things, like you have to have like benchmarks and metrics around time to value, right? So, typically you want net new customers to be sort of live and be able to actually like run in production by 60 days, right, out. If it's a segment that sort of deals with strategic customers or enterprise, maybe that's a little bit longer, because we know it takes a little bit longer to actually get traction in larger companies, right? But at least having a metric that you're making people accountable for, right, is really important. The other thing is around sentiment, right? So sentiment around the folks that were actually provided the various trainings, and making sure you're collecting that feedback and gathering things that could actually improve your onboarding process or your training delivery, right? Not all customers are created equal, right? So you have to, in some way, sort of identify segments of customers that work, or that prefer to work a certain way, right? And sort of tailor approaches to them.
So in terms of measurement, I'm also a big believer in voice of the customer. So when we talk to our customers, we'll do surveys and things like that. I was actually on a call recently with one of our customers, and she's like, I didn't have a good onboarding experience. So some of the things I'm creating and are validated by what this customer said. So things also stem from an onboarding as like, you know, looking at the support tickets as well as escalations, you know, product feature requests, how long does it take, again, to go live in the system, how many customers went into our training is another aspect we would measure. So all of these things, if the customers aren't doing these by like 30 days, we want to make sure that, you know, we're measuring that. We're doing customer sat surveys as well to get the feedback. So the other things I'm going to continue to be doing is, again, talking to our customer base, kind of validating the things we're putting out into the field to making sure that the customer has a good experience. So everything, all the programs I'm designing are based on, again, the customer's mindset and what their experience is.
Yeah, for us at Amplitude, it's tied to the customer journey. And for us, it's three basic things. First, do we understand why the customer bought? And have they been open with us about that, about what their objectives are, what their goals are, you know, why they decided to invest how much money, you know, into our product and our team. The next is quality data, which is tied to the data stream. If the data is not there, nothing will happen. There's a 45-day goal that my solutions team has to get that to happen, but it's hard, especially at the enterprise. Things will move really slow. So for my solutions team, it's really about project management and setting up expectations and understanding what are the compelling events, whether it be a release or you know, just some key date that the customer or the economic buyer really cares about to anchor the customer. And then the last for us is usage, adoption. For us, it's weekly querying users. So it's not good enough to just log in once and, you know, run one report. It's, are they coming back every week? And we have different standards for different levels of customers. So at the enterprise level, we expect 20 weekly querying users for the customer to check that box off, because all of that is rooted in like their actions, right? Have they told us why they bought? Are they sending us the right data? And are they actually using the platform, right? Based on those outcomes, we can say customers onboarded and move on. If not, then we have work to do.
So a lot of great metrics in there, ranging from CSAT, time to value, voice of the customer. The team that's responsible, or the person that's responsible for ensuring that those metrics get successfully completed, or those scorecard checkboxes get completed, do you bonus them on getting these things done? Why or why not?
No. It's just part of the expectation, right? At the end of the day, I bonus people based on outcomes, right? Like, how well did we do as far as sort of net retention outcomes, which is sort of, you know, key metric in the SaaS world. The idea is if you're doing all these things, the bonus just takes care of itself, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't necessarily need to do things that are sort of outside of that process that has already been built. I mean, there are going to be times when like you have to do that, right? And make exceptions, but that should not be the norm, right? Those should be exceptions. But if suddenly CSMs are just, you know, doing things, you know, that's not standardized, then you have a problem. Then your onboarding process is probably broken, right? And you have to revisit that and iterate and find sort of the right onboarding to make customers successful. So no, we don't.
So I'll answer that question from two different perspectives. Snowflake, it's expected for the CSM to do these things. That's part of their role. So no, we do not do that. In the 90-day onboarding program that I managed at New Relic, because it was specific to 90 days only, I did measure the CSMs on monthly active users, CSAT scores, finding opportunities for growth, cross-sell, upsell. So there were specific measurements because they were really focused on the beginning part of their journey. So there was variable comp tied to those aspects and those metrics. So.
Yeah, the answer is also no for us. I could spend hours talking about CS comp. It's a crazy field. Yeah, I think very similar to what you're saying. You know, it's really based on the outcomes. And right now, my team is actually going through a transition in terms of how we pay people. Right now, we pay on the lagging indicator, which is net expansion, net retention, whatever you want to call it. And for the business so far, it's what's been needed. But I think the tricky thing is that in that world, a CSM then is super focused on just making sure that a customer will renew, right, or they'll expand. And they might forget about all the leading indicators needed to actually get there. So one leading indicator is adoption. And when we were smaller, we were okay with measuring adoption as like a way to measure customer health. But as we started to get more in the enterprise, we started to really understand that adoption doesn't mean renewal. You can have 100 people using your product, but if the value is not there and the customer is not getting what we call quantifiable impact, then they're not going to renew because that's what the economic buyer cares about. So I'm pushing my team, and we're changing our structure to really focus on the quantifiable impact, because if a CSM can understand that level of impact from the customer, then the renewal, the expansion, right, will happen, right? There's no reason why a customer wouldn't keep the partnership going from that. And adoption, right, is there to help push that along. Sorry, long answer to your question.
No, I think there's merit in all three answers for sure. And I think it's when you get advice, again, you got to reflect on what the goal of the company is, the stage that they're at. So I think all three of those answers make a lot of sense. Suppose onboarding doesn't go well. The customer just never gets up and running. What do you guys do?
So first of all, you should have a process to address this, right? One of the things we do is we create what we call risk CTAs, right? So and flag that customer as not. You also have sometimes you have customers that don't want to be trained. Have you ever had that? Mm-hmm. Hey, I'm technical enough. Don't bother me. I'm not sitting down for 6 hours to be trained, right? That's also sort of a flag, right? Because you can almost correlate onboarding, sort of the quality of the onboarding to sort of outcomes downstream, right? And if you can actually do that in a way that that is quantifiable, that's great, right? But yeah, my recommendation is that you should have a process by which you're flagging these things, right? And then escalate internally to the appropriate person.
So I'll answer this question two different perspectives again. So in addition to the 90-day onboarding program I ran at New Relic, I had a risk intervention program. What that entailed was working with customers below a certain percentage of deployment and adoption. So it was a pooled CSM model that the CSM would work with certain customers in this threshold, get them to do a best practice, a demo, anything to get them back on track to where they're going to go renew the solution. So it was a scaled program that I ran for that set of customers. Snowflake, what we're designing is a get well program. So customers that are below a certain level of consumption will have best practice. We'll talk about specific use cases in terms of where else they can use Snowflake. Again, looking at metrics as who's been trained, do they know how to use the product? Maybe it's an opportunity to leverage our services organization to a deep dive workshop. So there'll be a lot of different components that will be part of this Get Well plan.
I love the name of that. That's awesome. I want to see it when it's all done.
Do the customers know that it's called the Get Well program?
No. That's internal.
Having some escalation path is necessary. From the frontline manager to me to my boss to CEO, we have that in place. But I think this ties back into what I said earlier around the CSM being accountable for the onboarding, just for the customer in general. It's really up to them to come up with that plan they think is best for the customer. And sometimes, and this might argue with me on this, which is cool, is if they don't want a training, okay, don't give it to them, right? Let them actually just go and operate. And after some time, we use our own product for this, but we can actually see what people actually are doing and what they aren't doing in our product. And from there, we can start building a case as to, hey, we know that other customers in your space, just like you, all right, are leveraging our product in X, Y, and Z ways to accomplish A, B, and C outcomes. We know that you're not doing that. Let's have a conversation, right? Because at the end of the day, when a customer doesn't want to do the onboarding, it means that the buyer is not bought in, right? And if the buyer is not bought in, then there are overall problems with the account. So it's really about how can the CSM come up with a way to re-engage the buyer for whatever reason and get them bought in so that they can get their people on their end to actually start doing things.
Cool. All right. So, Junan, how are we doing on time? One more question. All right. So let's go across the panel here. Famous last words. What's one piece of advice that you want to leave the room with so that they can do better onboarding at their companies?
You guys want to take it first?
Yeah, I'll start.
I have like 5.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that onboarding is a constant iteration process, right? I've now rebuilt onboarding 5-6 times. The most recent one was the second time this year. So it's the 2018 new onboarding V2. And it's important, right? Because as your business changes, as your customers change, you need to adapt to that. And it's cool because that's what we teach our customers as well. So we're kind of eating our own food that way. And the second thing, I made a plug for this earlier. I don't work for them, I promise, but command the message training. If you want to get alignment between go-to-market or between you and the salespeople, if you have that kind of capital, it is well worth the investment. Because now, when we talk with our sales counterparts, right, we're talking the same language, right? When we say gap framework or required capabilities, front 9, back 9, right? We're all saying the same things, and we know having that shared language has allowed us to communicate a lot better, and that's been huge.
So from an onboarding perspective, as you can see, it can be structured various ways. So it's also good to kind of test things out, like programs with a certain subset, get feedback, validate it with your customer base. Is this a good onboarding experience? What do you expect from us? So you can kind of design things based on, what the customer expects as a good experience. So making sure that you do checkpoints along the way in your onboarding process as you define that, and then iterating on those processes. So constant process improvement is part of this journey as well. So those are things that I think he talked about. And I second the command of the message. I just went through it with my company, so totally agree.
Yeah, so I think the point around getting alignment with sales is really important, right? And this idea that have you guys ever sat down with sales when they're talking about the process? Because you should, right? Because you'll hear a lot of things, right? Sometimes onboarding or the training process itself doesn't get the value that it should actually sort of be assigned, right? And one of the things that I think works well if you have that political capital is to ensure that all reps understand how to talk about onboarding, right? Test them, quiz them, right? Onboard them, right? And then sign them off, right? Because if they're able to really talk about it in a way that's that is real, you're going to have a very successful customer downstream.
Cool. Well, guys, let's give a round of applause for our panelists. That was awesome. think now everybody's favorite time, which is ask the audience, or the audience ask the panel. Who's got a great question? All right. And you.
Maybe once or twice. Hi, I'm Patty, for those who haven't met me before. And I have a question that's been kind of rolling around in my head a lot lately, which is, for onboarding, what are great things to assign as self-serve or automated, and what are things that really should be bespoke or custom delivered?
So it depends on your business, right? So if your business sort of caters to multiple types of companies, or like we're in the B2B space, right? And we typically see much more success when there's higher value assigned to the account, but less success on sort of the lower end of that, right? So I'm not sure if it will actually sort of work having a non-bespoke training, right? Because the product itself is just super complex, right? And it hasn't matured to the point where that could actually be achieved, right? So knowing your business and knowing your product and knowing sort of the reality by which a customer is going to be using your product. If it's complex, then build something that addresses that, right? And don't pigeonhole customers into a sort of self-serve type of model when you know for a fact that they're not going to be successful, right? If and when the product does get better over time, right, that's when you introduce something like that, right? But be honest with where your business is at, right? And then design things that address where you're at maturity-wise. Does that make sense?
Any other takers on that one?
I mean, it's hard. Sorry, it's hard. I've been with Amplitude for 5.5 years now, and next month will be the first one we start thinking about automating any part of the onboarding process. It's been very hands-on until now, and for the business, it's what's really been needed, right? We'll invest all the time in the world in the first 3 months or however months to make sure that the customer experience is really good throughout. Now that we're thinking more about efficiency, scalability, now we're thinking about automation. But until then, like, yeah, give them your people, right? That's really important to their success, and they'll appreciate it.
What about automation for your people, though? How do you cue them to do the right thing at the right time?
So you have to set up the framework for that and specific indicators throughout the journey to making sure you have the call to actions, the playbooks, all of those things built into the journey so the CSM knows when to reach out to the customer. So without that in place, it's really difficult. So we're actually in the process of building that right now. Alex over there is helping me. So yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be put in place. I'm also, in terms of automation, I'm looking at a couple of technologies for a pure self-serve model to see how that will play into our customer base, because we have pretty large customer base as it is, so I need to scale that pretty quickly. So.
Cool. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarang from Utrecht. Just so you guys all, oh, this is a problem. You guys all mentioned constantly updating your onboarding process, being very sensitive to how the needs of your business have changed over time and what you guys have done to it. So I guess my question is, from a really nuts and bolts perspective, how are you soliciting feedback about how your onboarding is doing, and then what are you doing in reflection to that?
Just ask the customer directly. We'll send out surveys once in a while, or we'll have a CSM talk to the customer right after onboarding is done to ask what just their experience. What was it like working with us, working with them, working with the solutions person, and getting that qualitative feedback that way. We also have the data to back it up in terms of usage and adoption to see if things have changed over each iteration. Are things getting better? Are they getting worse? Are they staying the same? Yeah, both qualitative, quantitative data will help kind of drive that process. And then on top of that, asking your CSMs, right? Your CSMs are the front lines. They're the ones going through this process with the customer, right? They'll know when things are not working or working really well. And they will tell you that because they're the ones that are probably the most frustrated by anything that's broken in onboarding.
So in addition to talking to customers, also getting feedback from your sales in other organizations. The onboarding topic is a hot topic at Snowflake today. Everyone has their definition of onboarding, so it's one of my big projects I'm working on to really define what does that mean to support, what does that mean to services, professional services. So really getting that feedback from them, because I think everyone has a different perspective on what is customer onboarding.
Yeah, I mean, sort of qualitatively, getting responses from customers on how training went, like, is important, right? I think also sort of other indicators like, obviously NPS, right? If you, for instance, set a new sort of NPS bar, it's a new steady state, maybe that's a good time to introduce a self-serve type of training, right? But if your NPS has not sort of like gotten to a point where there's no meaningful change, right? Or you set a new bar, you probably don't want to, change things yet and still address and optimize your current onboarding based on sort of where you are at that point. But
so do you do NPS after onboarding?
yeah, I mean, NPS is just a standard process that we do, right? But collecting that data and understanding the trends over time, right, and whether product sort of updates are helping you get to a new normal is important.
Right, but then you said that you do it frequently, but the same customer, how often do you survey?
It really depends. Yeah, it's different milestones, right? It's different sort of times when, because the other thing with NPS is like you don't want to keep asking the questions over, and I mean we all have, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, you survey different users in the company, right? And it's a tricky thing, but at the end of the day, the other thing to really consider as well is in high-touch, kind of high-value SaaS companies, typically, sort of the most important users are not the ones logging into your product, right? Decision makers, right? The economic buyer, as you had mentioned, right? So you have to have a process to get that feedback as well, and so on and so forth.
All right, we've got time for one more question.
Alex, hey.
Just talk loud, Alex.
Hey, so I work for Angeline at Snowflake. I started Snowflake about 2 years ago in sales. As of a month ago, switched teams to customer success. So one of my questions, and Angeline, you don't have to answer since we work together, but one thing I'm wondering is, we are catching up to sales. Sales has been established in our company. They make us a lot of money. They have a lot of support behind them. And what we're seeing is we're just playing catch up with them all the time. So how have you found ways to better align with the sales org? So first of all, they're qualifying their deals out better. So things, you don't have to clean up the mess afterwards. But also to the point where we're scaling so fast, how can we basically have them align with us rather than sometimes have there not be a ton of cohesiveness between the two departments?
How is your sales team comped? Generally.
Services. So.
Yeah, I think I've been dealing with this specific thing for the last few months as we think about 2019 planning, and I'm very fortunate to work with now a sales leader who is very much aligned with holding AEs accountable to the deals they bring in. So it's still 100% not finalized yet, but what we're thinking about doing is figuring out how to comp the AE also on renewals, right, and have them be accountable for that. Because if they're bringing in bad deals, then they have to feel that pain too. It's tricky though because you want to have the incentives aligned to the right behaviors for your salespeople. But yeah, it's a really tricky thing. So when I have a better answer, I'll let you know.
Yeah. One thing to consider is, it kind of goes along the same lines that we were talking about. Is like you got to align your own team's incentives to what makes sales what incentivizes sales. Right? I mean, they all want to make money, right? So for instance, one way of doing this is a comp structure around net retention, right? So at Figure 8, like we own the renewal revenue number, right? But at the same time, I don't just comp the team on gross renewal outcomes, right? I comp the team based on net renewal outcomes, right? Because we want to be able to sort of align with sales, right? And ensure that we are both working on expansion of the customer, right? And then the other thing that you want to try to demonstrate, right, is that you want to demonstrate the value of CS as far as uncovering those opportunities, right? In terms of, like CSQLs, for instance, right? And then showing the value of how fast those things actually kind of close compared to a net new deal, right? So again, sort of SaaS, just like basics, right? It's so much easier to actually expand a customer than to actually bring on a net new customer, right? At a factor of 5x, I think. So if you really have a land and expand model, you got to align incentives both on sort of sales as well as success on those things that could actually make both of your teams successful, right? Does that make sense?
So I'm in agreement with both of them. One way to also think about it is putting a compensation component around consumption for sales. So they're measured on how much the customer consumes. Again, tied to compensation model would be another way to align that.
Are any of you guys actually using comp plans for your AEs, though, that work in that way?
We're in discussion.
Yeah, in the process for next year.
I think it's probably more realistic to do this with, let's say, a solutions engineering team, right? So like, I wouldn't be surprised at some point down the line, SEs are actually, renewal outcomes are tied to, let's say, their bonuses, right? But the hunter AE sort of persona is going to be a little bit harder to crack.
Yeah, I think for us, our sales team has been really focused on landing, right? There's not a whole land and expand, but at some point, you're really focused on lands. And I think right now we're just starting to think about the expansion bit of it. It's been really great organically, but how can we drive the right behaviors to drive that more is now the next step for next year. So as you shift kind of priorities for your sales team or account management team, then realigning the comp model to reflect that is needed, and it's hard. It's really, really hard. So get ahead of it if you can.
There's a great article that I read by a guy named Romeo on CSQLs and how to align sales and customer success around the upsell. So look that up. I think that's a wrap.
Yeah.